Students of MTGO Academy, this is your Pauper Professor Jason Moore, and I would like to welcome you to the latest installment of Dime. Oh, dozen. Just wanted to see if I could pull that off at a reasonably fast speed here. Welcome, guys, to Dime a Dozen. We are playing with a deck that was requested by somebody. I'm sorry, I forgot who exactly in a comment, and I can't remember if it was for a video or on an article. I really apologize. I will go back and check to make sure who requested this, but at least I answered the request and I created a mono white control deck here. So this is crazy, mono white control. I don't know if I've ever played this in Pauper or seen anybody play it. I'm sure someone has, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to pretend like this is some groundbreaking thing, but there is quite a bit to actually talk about with this list that I came up with. So let's start with the mana base. We are playing 4 copies of Secluded Steppe here to just try and get as much cycling and as much card filtering, well, it's not filtering, but as much sifting through our deck as possible. So full 4 Secluded Steppes. We're playing 3 copies of Pauper Crossroads just to have another land that provides some utility. I mean, we don't need to have all of our mana come into play untapped, so it's okay for us to incorporate some more tapped lands that do something. And speaking of tapped lands that do something, we're actually playing 3 copies of Mortuary Mire as well. I think this is pretty critical because this is going to be part of our late game inevitability. And as a control deck, we really need to have inevitability in the late game. That basically means something that's going to help us ensure a victory the longer the game goes. And the reason that this is something that counts as inevitability is because we're playing Core Skyfisher in this deck, and you bounce the Mortuary Mire with the Skyfisher, then you play the Mire to get back another Skyfisher, and you can loop that for as long as the game lasts. As long as they're killing your core Skyfishers, you can keep getting them back. The rest is all plains. So there's 12 plains here because we have 10 tapped lands for a total of 22 lands. So I actually want to start with the other bits of inevitability that we have. Now there's not very much, but I feel it's very important to have some if you're going to be playing a control deck. So we have 1 copy of Pristine Talisman. This is going to help us gain life every single turn. So in any part of the game where the turns are stalemated, we're in a top deck war, we have that little tiny extra bit of an advantage in that our life total is going up higher and higher and higher and higher. And for decks that are aggressive, that need to beat us quickly, if they stumble for just a couple turns and we get our life total that much higher, that much further out of the danger zone, they are essentially going to lose just from that. This also gives us an extra bit of mana every turn. So not the most relevant thing ever, but Pristine Talisman has proven itself as a viable piece of inevitability in control decks all across the format. The other inevitability that we sort of have is the Silkbind Fairy plus Viridian Longbow combination. So Viridian Longbow is an equipment that once the creature is equipped with it, that creature is able to tap in order to deal 1 damage to a creature or player. Silkbind Fairy is a creature that you can equip with Longbow, and it has this strange untap ability that lets you tap a creature. So you can tap the fairy with the Longbow's ability to ping something, then you can pay 2 mana to untap the fairy, thereby tapping an opponent's creature, and then your fairy is untapped so that you can again tap it to ping with the Longbow, and then you can pay an additional 2 mana, untap it, and you can keep repeating that for as much mana as you have. So while we're only playing 1 of each copy of these cards, I wanted to throw that in here just to have access to that. I think the cards themselves are a little, I guess, narrow in how potent they are in terms of matchups that we might be facing. So I didn't want to flood our deck with copies of Longbow or Fairy. Let's say we're playing against an opponent without creatures or without many creatures. Not going to do a whole lot other than machine gun their life total potentially. It's very mana intensive, so I didn't want to flood it with that either. And that about wraps it up in terms of our inevitability in the late game. We do have Core Skyfisher bouncing things like Mortuary Mire to get us more and more advantage. But other than that, there's not much. I do want to mention one other card we are playing for the late game. It's a single copy of Caravan Escort. So you'll notice that a lot of control decks need to have some big splashy finisher. And in Pauper, it doesn't get all that big or that splashy, but we have seen things in control decks like Gurmag Angler, Fangren Marauder, Maul Splicer, Ulamog's Crusher, just Ruin Processor even, just big fat fatties that can close the game out in a reasonable amount of time. So I'm trying out this Caravan Escort as a way to do that. It becomes a 5/5 first striker if you have the mana and the time to pump into it. And that'll beat a Fangren Marauder, that'll beat a Gurmag Angler, and that'll beat anything underneath those cards, which encompasses a huge portion of Classic Pauper. So one of as well, just because I don't really want to overload our deck with these kind of things. Kind of a niche application there. So we do have the Mortuary Mires to get it back, and so I think one is enough for now. You'll notice we're testing out a lot of different cards in this deck just to see what is doable and what isn't. So when we're talking about playing a control deck in a single color, we want to try and pack it with as much card advantage and card draw as is reasonable. So we've got 4 Thraben Inspectors that can be bounced with Core Skyfisher in order to get extra cards out of our deck. We've got 3 Origin Spellbomb, which gets us a guy and gets us a card. I didn't want to play 4. I wanted to fit a lot of other test cards as well. So I felt like 4 Spellbomb was a little overkill. It is a little mana intensive here. You'll notice that because it's mono white, we're paying more mana for simple amounts of card draw than you would in black or blue. You could, in black pay 2 mana, draw 2 cards, and in blue you can get pretty close to doing that as well. Squadron Hawk provides us a bit of card advantage, and then lastly we have Wellsprings that we can bounce with Skyfisher or blow up with Core Sanctifiers. Now Sanctifiers can obviously get opponents artifacts or enchantments, but barring that, we do have an extra card we can milk out of our deck. Serrated Arrows provides some card advantage, and that's about it. Everything else is a bit of one-for-ones. We've got 2 copies of Mana Tithe. Not the best counterspell ever printed, but it can get some people if the timing is right. Very situational. Better in the early game. We've got 2 copies of Righteous Blow, 1 copy of Sunlance as our 1 mana removal. We've got 4 Journey to Nowhere as 2 mana removal. We've got 2 Celestial Flare, which is an edict effect against opponents, and that could be very useful if we face Hexproof or even just a big creature coming at us or trying to block us. And 1 Oblivion Ring. So that's basically the main deck. That is what we're working with. The sideboard is got some pretty interesting bullets, things that should do some work for us. So for instance, Relic of Progenitus will obviously help us disrupt graveyards. Cop Red will hopefully take Burn out of the equation. Leave No Trace, hopefully do a similar thing against Hexproof. We've got Holy Light to sweep boards full of Goblin tokens and Elves. Strands to stop attack steps from vicious, aggressive decks and to stop any sort of combo kills if we need to stop that. Some sort of big, fat Rolling Thunder or something. I mean, not necessarily going to bring it in for that, but the possibility, or at least the option, is there. Dust to Dust, maybe smash some Mirror Enforcers if we can. And then everything else, I mean, Lone Missionary is good against Burn, but it's also just fairly strong against most aggro. And then we've got another Sunlance to come in against early attacking guys too, just to bolster our early game in that regard. Alright guys, this is mono white control, and it'll be very interesting to see how this performs, since this is something that I haven't really worked with in the past. Obviously, if you've followed this this column for a long period of time, you'll know that I am certainly no stranger to mono white. But on the controlling side of things, well, that has yet to be seen, or is yet to be seen. I'm not really sure the proper way to say that sentence. Let's battle.